This is an exchange that we've been to before, Ms. Sturgeon, and I think you should have seen it already. I wasn't planning on reading it all out, but it is an exchange between the now First Minister, then Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, and Professor Leach from December 2021, in which he is describing, against a background of a discussion between them, about the possibility that at that time there might require to be further measures taken to stem the Omicron wave which had just hit Scotland. Is that broad context in terms of where we were in the pandemic correct?
Looking at the date there, then that's exactly where we were.
Thank you. So they had been discussing that, and Mr. Yousaf said that he took a hell of a bullet at Cabinet, but might be able to strengthen the measures, even if just slightly. We think we can find £100 million within the portfolio. And then there is a discussion where he again says, don't know if it'll happen the last minute, and FM not remotely happy it's at this last stage, but let's see if it strengthens a package of measures that are far too weak as things stand. Professor Leach says, I was listening, I almost intervened to deflect for you. She was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And he agrees with the principle. And Mr. Yousaf says, that's just the way it is. Her ranting at me isn't the problem. I can take it, it's whether the quantum at this stage helps us strengthen the package, I think it's meant to mean. Though feel free to defend me at a later stage. Today's numbers lower than expected. Suspect some people are not testing given Christmas round the corner. So this is an exchange in which they are discussing a cabinet meeting. The reference to she is you, I think.
I assume so.
Yes. Do you recall this period just broadly, and we'll get into some of the details?
I recall the period not just broadly, I recall it in detail. I recall the cabinet meeting in detail too.
Excellent. Yeah. I think what the context is, if I understand it from the evidence that we've heard from Mr. Yousaf and indeed Ms. Forbes, is that there were discussions around the possibility of having further measures, but there were issues pertaining to whether or not there would be funding to support business if there were a further lockdown or further restrictions. And that at the cabinet meeting, Mr. Yousaf, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, had suggested somewhat out of the blue, I think Ms. Forbes told us, that he, despite efforts made to try to find funding to assist for that purpose, he had managed to find within his budget £100 million, which wasn't previously known about. Is that correct? Please correct me if I've got that wrong.
I think it's broadly correct. If I may, I can go into...
Well, what I'm really interested in is the possibility, is the suggestion that I'll make to you, that this is indicative of a culture in which you did not take kindly to people bringing up at cabinet meetings things that you had not already had brought to your attention and on which you had not already made a decision.
No, that is absolutely not the case. There was no such culture within the government I led. I think, if I may, in order to answer that question properly, I need to set out the circumstances of that cabinet meeting. I had, in advance of that cabinet meeting, asked Ms. Forbes, as the Finance Secretary, to undertake an exercise across government to ascertain, we were finding it difficult with the UK government in the financial discussions at that point, to ascertain if there was money we could redirect, free up, make available from within the Scottish Government budget to give additional support to businesses should we require to impose additional restrictions. Ms. Forbes had done that exercise. She had done it rigorously and robustly, and she had reported at Cabinet that the outcome of this, having gone round all of the portfolios, was that there wasn't really any money of any significant scale to have. At which point, Mr. Yousaf, and let me say, Mr. Yousaf was doing this for the best of intentions, I'm not questioning his motives, said, well, actually, and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, I can make £100 million available. In that moment, I felt he was doing a real disservice to the Finance Secretary, because she had just reported that she had done a job and it had resulted in no money being available, and then he, seemed to take the feet from her in that. I supported and believe is important that there were robust discussions around the Cabinet table. There were robust discussions around the Cabinet table, but I expected all my ministers to operate on a basis of mutual respect and of making sure that they were operating collegiately. And in that moment, I didn't think that was the case, and I was not particularly happy about it. I have to concede that. I think that was probably exacerbated by the fact that, and I can't recall the date, you perhaps will be able to show it to me. I think sometime maybe a couple of weeks before that, Mr Yousaf had indicated to me on WhatsApp that he might be able to find some money in this order. And my response to him was, speak to Kate. And at that meeting, it appeared that he hadn't done so. So that was the context. And I perhaps was also sceptical given the pressures on the National Health Service at that point, that it would be sensible to take £100 million from dealing with the acute pressures in the health service to fund business support, but that is more of a substantive issue. So that is the context of that. As First Minister, I make no apology for this. I always tried to lead from the front. I always took a the buck stops with me attitude. I always took Cabinet meetings extremely seriously, made sure I was briefed and had done all the preparation and reading, and I expected similar from my Cabinet Secretaries, and I think that is how good government should work. So that's the context of that. That was not a regular occurrence at Cabinet. It was a very particular set of circumstances that as it happens, I'm not sure that exchange doesn't slightly overstate it, but I do concede that I expressed some displeasure at the process by which the offer had come to the table. And it was more on behalf of Ms Forbes, because I thought it did a disservice to her and the very professional job that she had done.
But we've heard Ms Forbes on this very subject, so we know what her position in that regard is. Do these messages show, Ms Sturgeon, that whilst Cabinet Secretaries might complain in private, as in these, as we've just seen, they would ultimately be expected to fall back in line behind your view on matters?
No, absolutely not. I suspect in every government everywhere across the world, and I would imagine that the Scottish Government was no different, that ministers will, moan about the First Minister or the Prime Minister to each other. Maybe I used to do it in a previous job in the Scottish Government as well. So that is normal. But I expected Cabinet discussions, and Cabinet discussions were full, robust, detailed. I expected all Cabinet Secretaries to come to those discussions able to argue their point, put their point of view across, and then for us to come to a position at the end of that. That's how Cabinet government works. It was absolutely not the case. And I've referenced Cabinet minutes before, and you have seen all the Cabinet minutes in relation to COVID, but this would be true of Cabinet minutes generally. There is usually 2-3 pages in a Cabinet minute that in detail summarises the discussion, the points that were raised. It doesn't attribute those points to individuals. That's not how Cabinets are minuted, but it goes into detail about the points raised. So you can look across all of these minutes and see the nature and the detail of the discussion that has been had. And that is how I operated within government, and it's how I would have expected all my Cabinet Secretaries to operate.